I'd recommend this game to you, but they're gonna announce the remake, tomorrow. That's just how it feels these days, don't it? I almost don't even really want to pick up brand new games because, there's this feeling that like, oh, in a year or two, there's gonna be a much better version of that game available. And time is flying so fast, man. I mean, we're getting remakes and remasters of games that released in like, 2017 or whatever. And that just feels damn modern, but when you look at it, like, holy crap, man, that's nearly a decade ago at this point. And I think things feel strange because when you look back at games that released in 2017 on, say, the PS4, I think graphics still looked really damn good back then. I mean, you look at something like, let's say, Uncharted: The Lost Legacy. That doesn't necessarily look like it would be out of place compared to a game releasing these days. Yeah, sure, I mean, like, oh, maybe the frame rate isn't where you need it to be, the resolution isn't where you need it to be. But still, I mean, I think you'd be a little crazy if you said, like, oh man, this game looks like ass. But if you go back to, like, 2017 and you remake or remaster a game that's like from 2009, it definitely felt a lot more justified. What's got me thinking about this right now? Well, pretty much everything releasing these days. But most notably, I started playing the Until Dawn remake on PS5. This is the PS4 version. This released in 2015, and the PS5 remake of Until Dawn released in 2024. And this is just one example in a giant slew of remakes and remasters Sony's been doing ever since around the launch of the PS5 generation, where I just kind of asked, like, what are we doing here? So this was actually my very first time trying out Until Dawn. I saw the remake was available on the PlayStation Plus service, so I downloaded that and tried that first. And then I popped in the original, which I've had on my shelf for quite a while, so I finally gave this a go. And alright, here's the thing. This remake, yes, I would say it's pretty damn unnecessary. It's pretty obvious to me this remake went into production and released when it did because an Until Dawn movie was releasing a few months after that, in April of 2025. So Sony wanted like a brand new PS5 game that they could sell on store shelves and just kind of market right alongside the movie. They could coexist with each other, instead of just telling people, hey, buy this ass-old PS4 game. But here's the thing, this remake is very conflicting to me because on one hand, I get it. On the other hand, I absolutely don't. I think the original Until Dawn holds up graphically quite well. However, it does still kind of feel like, like early era PS4, a little rough around the edges in some ways. Plus, those fixed camera angles. Ugh! Yeah, the original Until Dawn features a lot of fixed camera angles, kind of reminiscent of old school survival horror games like the OG Resident Evils. The remake gets rid of that and kind of tweaks some controls, and overall I do find it to be much more accessible, a lot easier to just jump in and play the remake. It looks and feels and controls a lot more similarly to any other game, which does feel nice, but at the same time, it kind of just takes a lot of the uniqueness away from Until Dawn. It's already kind of a thing where you can take pretty much most of Sony's like AAA PlayStation releases and just put them all side by side. They all look so goddamn similar. The third person over the shoulder view, they all look the goddamn same at the end of the day. All these games are at the very least okay. Like Days Gone is okay. But that's just the thing with Days Gone. Days Gone may be fine, but it's also like generic as f***. And I honestly think kind of that fixed camera perspective from Until Dawn kind of made Until Dawn feel a lot more unique. But it's not as accessible, so make it completely third person. That's fine. It's not like you're really losing a ton. It's still the same game. But at that point, I'm going like, why the f*** are we remaking this? They had a couple bits and bobs here. The opening of the original is just so damn quick, where the opening of the remake definitely adds a couple of little scenes here and there. And honestly, I do think with the remake, the added scenes do kind of overall add to kind of the suspense, the tension, I guess. Now, I want you to keep in mind, like I'm saying, I'm talking about like the first hour or so of Until Dawn, because again, I just started playing it for the first time, and I have enjoyed it. I did always ironically enjoy Heavy Rain from the PS3, and this is giving me kind of Heavy Rain vibes, but not as ironically fun. This genuinely is an interactive horror movie, and I think that's kind of cool. And I would never say the original on PS4 aged poorly or anything, but I do think for casual players looking to play a spooky little game, I think the PS5 version is pretty good. Probably a little easier to jump into, but I have seen a lot of fans of the original Until Dawn say that the remake kind of takes away a lot of like what made the original special. Like I said, like the fixed camera angles, I think are a little unpopular with more casual players, but for people that really appreciate this game to its core, I think they're kind of like, well, yeah, I mean, like there's a reason why I used fixed camera angles. In some ways, the fixed camera angles feel more cinematic because they're camera angles. How many movies are you seeing that have camera angles that are, oh, behind the back, third person, walking in a straight line, looking like the Last of Us ass looking ass? I almost feel like the remake shift to a camera angle like that makes it almost feel like the game is trying to act like it's more of like a traditional third person game, when in reality, like it's an interactive horror movie. Own up to it. The fixed camera angles, yeah, they may be more awkward, but it's Until Dawn, for God's sake. But this has got me thinking about all the other re-releases that Sony's been doing on the PS5 lately that are just feel unnecessary. Now, most of these re-releases are remasters, and you can just access them by putting in the original PS4 disc and then purchasing like a $10 upgrade or something. And that's fairly reasonable, but I think people, including myself, kind of just get annoyed when we just see these things pop up in the Sony State of Plays or pop up on news sites about like, oh man, Horizon Zero Dawn remastered on PS5. I'm just like, what are we doing? Because there's nothing immediately you think of about the original Horizon Zero Dawn that, oh man, that needs to get upgraded. Oh man, we need a new version of this because this original PS4 version, like, oh man, it can't be played anymore. But I mean, you go into like what the remaster does and you're like, okay, I kind of get it. Like, remember all the moments in this game where you talk to people and you see the static ass facial animations and dialogue, all that? It just, yeah, like that needed upgraded. Then you have stuff like Spider-Man Remastered, which launched with the PS5 back in 2020. It was included with the Ultimate Launch Edition of Miles Morales here. And yeah, as you know, like a little bonus inclusion, why the hell not? Sure. But then you look at how much this remaster cost to produce. It was like $40 million. I'm like, what the hell? You have the Uncharted Legacy of Thieves collection, which is just Uncharted 4 and the Lost Legacy, which I just find to be a little odd. I think it would have been cool if you got the entire Uncharted lineage here, or at least the Uncharted Nathan Drake collection on PS4, plus 4 and the Lost Legacy. I think that would have been really cool. But no, it's just the two PS4 games, and, you know, they're just kind of like, all right, you know, you got a higher frame rate, 4K, you know, it's really not that much. It's like games look gorgeous, and it's cool to have them on this more powerful platform. But re-releases like this, and Until Dawn, and, of course, The Last of Us Part 1 feel like they were just kind of done to have games release kind of alongside films or TV shows. You know, it's no coincidence that this collection released pretty much right alongside the Uncharted movie, same with the Until Dawn remake, and The Last of Us Part 1 launched pretty damn close to The Last of Us HBO show premiering. The Last of Us Part 1 is a full-blown remake of the original Last of Us, which it's hard to really even tell because it is so damn similar. It's basically a shot-for-shot remake in the video game sense. When I played this, I couldn't even tell a single damn difference between this and The Last of Us Remastered on PS4. But when you actually compare them all, like, yeah, it's obvious that they recreated The Last of Us scene by scene, and certain scenes do play out differently in terms of like, oh, the camera angle might be a little different, or maybe a movement here or there might be a little different. The character models are all new, all of this stuff. Yeah, I would say this is the most unnecessary remake that I've ever really seen. Until Dawn is pretty damn unnecessary, but at the same time, like, when you look at the Until Dawn remake, you can tell, like, they at least changed up a couple of things. It's the same game, but it's at least different enough where I'm kind of like, okay, like, it's a close number 2, but this is number 1. Because looking at something like The Last of Us Remastered on PS4, it's not that that game really felt like, oh yeah, that needs an upgrade, oh, that doesn't age very well. Like, it's still, it works fine. Now, to be fair, probably in like 10 years or something, we're gonna look at The Last of Us Part 1 and go like, oh wow, man, this is the definitive way to play. And yeah, that's still true. I mean, like, you know, I guess it's pretty definitive. Except for the fact it doesn't include the multiplayer. What the hell? I guess, like, at this time when this game came out, they were still planning to put out The Last of Us Online on PS5, which was meant to be a standalone multiplayer game. The original Last of Us included multiplayer, and they wanted to build this out to be even bigger, so, you know, they couldn't just include it in The Last of Us Part 2. It had to be its own standalone thing, and they canceled it. So The Last of Us Part 1 doesn't include multiplayer. The Last of Us 2 doesn't include multiplayer. The only way you can still play multiplayer is by picking up The Last of Us Remastered. Oh, and then you have The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered, which, all right, at the very least, it's kind of like, you know, one of these things where it's not a remake or anything like that. You can just put in your PS4 disc, and then you can get like a little $10 upgrade, and you get like a bunch of little PS5 improvements. Oh, yeah, okay, cool. That already kind of annoyed people, and then later down the line, you start to see Sony announcing, oh, The Last of Us Complete, a bundle with these 2 games included. And, you know, like, I think it's a little silly to get annoyed at that, because it was literally just like a store listing. Like, it's just a bundle you can get on the PlayStation 5 store. But at the same time, I think it's just getting kind of tiring as a fan of PlayStation and as a PS5 owner, as a PS4 owner, 3 owner, all of this, to just see the same, like, 5 franchises just constantly getting milked and re-released and remade and all of this. Like, it's kind of making me beg for a sequel to something I don't even really care to see. Like, I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ, just give me, like, Days Gone 2 or something. I don't even really want that. But no, it was reported Days Gone 2 isn't happening. But, here's Days Gone Remastered, bitch. All right, here's the thing. I understand why pretty much all of these remasters or remakes get pumped out, specifically from Sony. Now, I can tell game development is getting really damn expensive and really damn lengthy. A lot of these studios take like roughly 5 years or so to pump out a new game, sometimes even longer. You know, we went from 2020's Ghost of Tsushima to 2025 with Ghost of Yote. You know, a 5-year gap, that's not like the worst thing in the world, but pretty much because of where we are with this console, pretty sure that's what the Ghost developer Sucker Punch's only PS5 game is gonna be. Well, then you look back to like the Xbox 360 and PS3 days, and we were getting like full-blown trilogies and then some on those consoles. Well, what do you do these days to fill the gaps when game development is just taking too damn long? Well, these remasters make a lot of sense. But there's a major problem. It's the old law of diminishing returns, and we've been experiencing that with graphics for a good couple of years now. It's like I said about Horizon Zero Dawn. That launched in 2017, and we're officially at the point where it's not like a remaster is completely unheard of. You look back at all of the remastered games that came out on the PS4, and a lot of those games were only a couple of years old when they released as remasters on those consoles. Tomb Raider Definitive Edition was only like 1 year old when it launched on PS4. Same with The Last of Us Remastered. Like, that launched in summer of 2013, and then the PS4 version titled Remastered, which I think it was always absurd that you have a game called Remastered, a remastered thing from something that was a year old at that point. And let's not kid ourselves. These games definitely got criticism back in the day. I remember Tomb Raider Definitive Edition was criticized to high hell for some reason. I think just because they were reselling it or something. I don't know. But looking back at it, it's just like, yeah, why the hell now wouldn't they put that out on the modern consoles? Especially considering the PS4 and Xbox One at the time were not backwards compatible with the PS3 or 360. So these re-releases and remasters, remakes, all of that made a lot more sense because these consoles were pretty much starting from ground zero. They were completely rebuilding their own library, which is why we got so many remasters during that generation. But now that they're doing that with the PS5 and Xbox Series X gens, you know, with game development growing longer and longer, you know, it makes sense for them to try to kind of fill those gaps with remasters and remakes and all of that. Especially in Sony's case when they're trying to put out movies based on these franchises as well, along with putting these games out on PC for the first time. Stuff like The Last of Us Part 1, Until Dawn, the Spider-Man games, Uncharted, they're getting PC ports along with these PS5 upgrades. So believe me, it all makes sense. However, the PS5 can already play all of these games' PS4 versions, and the PS4 versions still hold up pretty well graphically. And when they're trying to sell these games at like full price, $70, yeah, I think it's absolutely unnecessary and absurd. I'm sick of seeing the exact same franchises over and over again. We're at a point in gaming where a game that released 10 years ago, oftentimes, like, all you need to do to it is pop it in 4K, put it at 60 frames per second, and I think you're good to go. I think from the ground up remakes are wonderful things when it makes sense. This, I don't really think it made sense to do a from the ground up remake. But that got me thinking about other unnecessary remakes and remasters lately. Now, here's the thing. Unnecessary doesn't mean bad. Before I usually talk about a lot of these topics, I like to kind of Google around and try to make sure that, like, all right, do I have like all the games I kind of want to talk about here? And looking up articles that people wrote about unnecessary remakes and whatnot, a lot of them I think get the word unnecessary confused with the word bad. Here are two examples I see talked about all the time when talking about unnecessary remakes and remasters. Grand Theft Auto, the trilogy, the definitive edition. Was this bad? Oh, hell yes it was. You look at how this game was performing at launch, and it was atrocious, especially on Nintendo Switch. Like, this game ran poorly, it looked bad in numerous instances. This thing was a disaster. But was the concept of this game unnecessary? No! These games weren't super readily available on modern platforms. Sure, on PS4, they re-released them through the PS2 on PS4 section of PlayStation Store. San Andreas was available on Xbox One through backwards compatibility. But no, the concept of this re-release, I think, was 100% necessary. You're bringing these legendary games from the PS2 era back on modern platforms, and with some modern enhancements like, you know, a GTA 5 like weapon wheel, kind of modern lighting, all of that stuff. This was a great idea. Goodbye. Same with Silent Hill HD Collection. This is always the go-to. Oh my god, look at this. Comic Sans? Yeah, it's a sucky-ass remaster. But again, it's kind of like, all right, you know, re-releasing Silent Hill 2 and 3 in HD. It makes sense. I want to talk about things like Until Dawn and The Last of Us Part 1, where a remake of them, we can maybe talk about like how much it makes sense, but at the end of the day, yeah, it's unnecessary. These remasters ain't unnecessary. They may have sucked ass, but that's neither here or there. Something like Super Mario Galaxy getting a second remaster on Nintendo Switch is unnecessary. Now, keep in mind, I do appreciate a lot of the kind of fine-tuning they did to the 2025 remaster of Super Mario Galaxy on Switch compared to the 2020 remaster included in Mario 3D All-Stars. This one is definitely a lot more refined, but it's still kind of like, all right, buddy. You re-released this game twice, and there are technically two different versions of this game on the same platform. I mean, all right, this one they discontinued in 2021 for some fucking reason. And this one is meant to stay on store shelves for the foreseeable future, alongside the first time Mario Galaxy 2 has been re-released on modern platforms. So, okay, sure, still unnecessary. But that got me thinking of a bunch of retro remakes, most notably ActRaiser Renaissance. I remember when this got announced in a Nintendo Direct, and just seeing the footage, and I believe it came out that day, and it's like, like, in some ways, like, it's just like, okay, sure. Like, I'm not opposed to a lot of NES, SNES games getting remade with modern visuals. Pixel art is cool and all, but sometimes, you know what, it's nice to get, like, a more modern coat of paint, or more modern feeling controls and whatnot. This thing looks stupid. I don't like how it looks cheap, it looks like a mobile game, and overall, I just find this to be unnecessary because it's not really doing anything for ActRaiser that, let's say, a basic re-release collection wouldn't already do. If they just put out like the ActRaiser Legacy Collection and it included ActRaiser 1 and 2, and it's just the two SNES games, and they look like SNES games, that's all they are, I think that would have done it just as good, if not better, than ActRaiser Renaissance. But ActRaiser Renaissance just looks like this really cheap, weird-ass mobile game kind of blown up to a console. Much like the Secret of Mana remake released for PS4. I don't get this. You know, when this got announced, I think everybody collectively kind of went like, wow, well, that looks really cheap and ugly. You know, when you look at gameplay of this game, it really gives off vibes of like the Final Fantasy 3D remakes they were doing a couple of years back, you know, on the Nintendo DS, on the PSP, where you're taking these top-down RPGs and you're creating a 3D remake of them, but it's on kind of smaller scale platforms. So, I mean, yeah, you look at the visuals of those versions, and yeah, I mean, obviously, they don't look like a modern console game at the time, but that's okay because they were for the portables. This kind of gives me that same exact feeling, but the thing is, like, while this did also come out on PS Vita I mean, this was like 2018, man. The PS Vita was practically dead, so most people saw this as a PS4 game. And strangely, it didn't release on something like the Nintendo Switch, which at the time, I think we were all kind of going, it's just like, this doesn't look great, but it would have at least made sense on the Switch since it was originally a Super Nintendo game. This is a situation where, in my opinion, you either gotta go all the way or just re-release the original with a couple of bells and whistles. You look over on the Nintendo Switch, and in 2019, here in North America, they released the Collection of Mana, which included the Super Nintendo original version of Secret of Mana, which, you know, obviously, for modern audiences, I think most people could probably pick this up a little quicker and be like, all right, I get it. You know, like, I'm not gonna dispute that. But I also think most modern audiences would pick this up and they would be like, this looks super cheap. I'm not really interested in this. Like, who was this appealing to other than people that were already fans of Secret of Mana? In my opinion, a remake like this only really made sense on portables, but because kind of the lead platform for it at the time was the PS4, it just felt like an incredibly cheap remake. And that's just the thing, man. A lot of these retro games, when they're remade, I just have to ask, like, why? Remember back during the Xbox Live Arcade days, you had a lot of classic games return, but only in the form of remakes. I specifically remember when Ubisoft, of all publishers, created a remake of Turtles in Time, the Ninja Turtles arcade game. Turtles in Time reshelled. I mean, it looks kind of nice, but it's also, like, not the same game. And this was at the time when Turtles in Time was kind of considered to be, like, the be-all, end-all arcade beat-em-up. This is, like, one of the greatest arcade games of all time. Yet they didn't put out the original version on Xbox Live Arcade. They remade it from the ground up with this 3D remake, and it has a bunch of changes. You don't have the same music. The level designs are a bit different. The art style is completely different, and it's just not as good as the original. So you just kind of have to ask, like, what was the point of going through all of the work to remake this stuff? Same goes for, like, Castle of Illusion on Xbox Live Arcade. You know, Sega remade this Sega Genesis game, Castle of Illusion, starring Mickey Mouse, and the Xbox Live Arcade version is like a completely different game. It's like this 2.5D 3D remake of Castle of Illusion. At that point, I'm just like, what are we doing here? Like, why call it Castle of Illusion? Call it Castle of Illusion 2. Call it a sequel. I don't know. But that got me thinking of another Xbox Live Arcade game. This was an original game, and it was honestly like one of the big first indie games to, like, really hit it big on Xbox 360, and that was Braid. You know, Braid is a tremendous game, you know, a real pioneer in indie games, because, you know, it kind of combined a very interesting gameplay mechanic involving rewinding time with a story that kind of, like, is involved with that. And it doesn't have, like, the craziest, like, in-your-face story, but it's a very compelling release. And I think Braid should 100% be respected as a game that really showed that, like, man, like, video games can deliver a very impactful story without being, like, super, like, dialogue, cutscene heavy and all of that, while also taking advantage of the fact that it is a video game. You know, I love something like The Last of Us' story, but you can obviously tell with, like, The Last of Us HBO show that story can work in numerous mediums. I don't think Braid's story works as well as, like, a movie or a TV show. It truly is a story that I think really works because it's a video game and you're controlling it, and it's about kind of rewinding time, and, you know, you're kind of uncovering something with that mechanic. So I think it's really cool. You know, Braid is a pioneer in indie games. And then they remastered it. Braid Anniversary Edition. Here's the thing. I don't think a remaster of Braid is necessarily unnecessary in of itself. The problem is, it took 4 goddamn years to release. They announced Braid Anniversary Edition in 2020, and it finally released in 2024. And Jonathan Blow, who created Braid, ended up saying that Anniversary Edition tanked. Like, it did not sell well at all. And that's incredibly unfortunate. But at the same time, you gotta look at this and be like, why the did it take that long to put out from announcement to release? Obviously, problems arise, stuff comes up. I'm not saying that, like, oh, what the hell were you guys doing? But I do think this game did not do well because it got announced in 2020 and it took 4 years for a remaster of an incredibly short indie game from 2008. You know, it's to the point that the name doesn't even really make any sense to me because it's called Braid Anniversary Edition. It launched in 2008. It got announced in 2020, so 12 years, and then launched in 2024, so that's 16 years. I'm like, well, what anniversary are we celebrating here? Now, there's a lot of cool content included. There's a bunch of new levels, commentary, all of that stuff. That's all fine and good, but I think it's unnecessary because the publisher lost money on this and couldn't pay their team. And while I appreciate the effort put into this as a remaster, I think overall you would have gotten a similar amount of sales by just doing a straight port of the original on modern platforms. And it wouldn't have taken 4 years to do it, so Now we got another anniversary edition. This is Skyrim Anniversary Edition, but this is Special Edition. All right, now I remember Skyrim Special Edition in 2016 was kind of a big deal because, you know, it's been 5 years since Skyrim released in 2011, and they were like, all right, we're gonna put out Skyrim on modern consoles, you know, kind of with a few bells and whistles, remastered graphics, all that stuff. But then Anniversary Edition released in 2021, and man, like, I just don't think this was worth it at all. The Anniversary Edition by itself was just $50, which is pretty much Skyrim Special Edition with this Anniversary Edition content included as a part of the package. Now, if you already have Special Edition, then you could have gotten the Anniversary Edition content for $20, which I think is a little absurd. Pretty much it just includes, like, a lot of Creation Club stuff. Okay. Overall, it just kind of felt like an excuse to create a native version of Skyrim for PS5 and Xbox Series X. That's all a lot of these modern re-releases are. You know, games that released on PS4, they just want to find an excuse to pump them out on PS5. Case in point, the PS5 and Xbox Series X versions of GTA 5. Of course, like, I do appreciate 4K, 60 frames per second, it says it all right here. Fast load times, adaptive triggers and haptic feedback, 3D audio. You can transfer all your save data to the PS5. Buddy, it's a goddamn PS3 game. You know, this does kind of bring up the question because obviously this is an improved version of GTA 5. Which was an improved version of GTA 5. But you kind of have to ask, like, when is enough enough? When are we gonna just stop having to update the same game over and over and over again? Because, like, yeah, it is nice to have GTA 5 in a higher resolution, higher frame rate, all of that stuff. Even though that's what GTA 5 was on the PS4 compared to GTA 5 on the Xbox 360. But things are ever evolving, and GTA 5 is a game that they've been supporting ever since 2013. So obviously, like, it does make sense that a PS5 version releases. But to be honest, I mean, you compare GTA 5 on the PS4 to the PS5 version, it doesn't look that much different, buddy. I think it would have been nice if there was more substantial content included with these new releases. Maybe even further improved graphics, because GTA 5 still looks and sounds and feels really great, but when you compare, like, the character models and animations, it obviously is from, like, a generation ago. It still looks fine, but it's obvious things could be better. And when you can already play the PS4 version of GTA 5 on the PS5, why not make the PS5 version that much more better? Rockstar is fucking loaded. They have so many employees. If they really wanted to, they could have made GTA 5 on the new consoles that much more impressive and that much better. But now it's literally just, it's GTA 5 again, but at 4K. And 60 frames per second, which is cool. Like, I'm happy that's a thing, but, you know, I mean, like, when you've already re-released it this many times and it's been over 10 years, why not make your re-release just a little more substantial? There's just a little more stuff to it. Hell, at least with the PS4 and Xbox One versions of GTA 5, they added, like, a full-blown first-person mode to that. Like, that's at least kind of interesting. This is what a lot of these PS5 remasters are all about. Here we have Gears of War Reloaded, which, you know, I mean, like, the whole gimmick of this release is kind of just, they needed an excuse to remaster Gears of War again, so then they can put it out on the PS5 with a fancy new title. Because fundamentally, this is literally just Gears of War Ultimate Edition, but in 4K and 60 frames per second, which again is nice, but it's also like, why give it a fancy new title? Call it Gears of War Ultimate Edition. When this title got announced, like, I was expecting with a title like that, this was more of a full-blown remake of the original Gears of War, not a remaster of a remaster. And, you know, stuff like this where they just focus on one game, sometimes I understand, but other times I just don't understand what they're doing there. So, like, when God of War 3 released on the PS4, you know, God of War 3 remastered, You know, the PS4 is kind of where I think a lot of people finally kind of jumped into a lot of franchises. You know, this is where gaming was starting to get very big. And a lot of people jumped ship from the Xbox 360 to PlayStation 4. So, you know, hey, man, we can experience all these PlayStation franchises for the first time. The PS4 was where I first played the Uncharted trilogy. The PS4 was where I first played The Last of Us. So, God of War would have really benefited from having, like, the entire series on PS4, but instead they're like, no, here's just the third one remastered. You know, it's kind of like with Gears of War Reloaded. Why just do the one when you can do like, you know, a remastered version of the entire series, or at least the trilogy? And obviously I know the answer, it's budget, development time, like what makes the most sense. I get it. But with Gears of War Reloaded, Gears of War 1 is, you know, a classic game. But I do think it is very much an older Xbox 360 game. So is Gears of War 1 really gonna win over, like, the entire PlayStation crowd? Like, it's good, but it's also like, I think if you had the whole trilogy there and you could experience the story and how the gameplay just progresses and gets better throughout time, I think that would have been a much smarter move. And also, like I said, Gears of War 1 was already remastered with Gears of War Ultimate Edition. You could have remastered Gears of War 2 for the first time, remastered Gears of War 3, hell, Gears of War Judgment if you just want to around a little bit. Now, it is kind of the opposite thing with God of War because, you know, I know why they did 3, because God of War 3 was a very critically acclaimed game. God of War Ascension on PS3 wasn't as critically acclaimed, so, you know, okay, you know, whatever, yeah, do God of War 3, sure. And the thing with these remasters is they kind of wanted to do, like, PS3 games and just kind of bump them up to 1080p with a stable frame rate. That was kind of the point of these remasters. And something like God of War 3 Remastered, when it released, looked like a pretty modern game on PS4. I think that was important for them. God of War 1 and 2 look really great for PS2 games, but they look like fucking PS2 games. So I think they just went with this one because it looked the best. It was the easiest to just kind of polish up the original games. You know, they still look fine for PS2 games, but, you know, like, they definitely still look like they've aged the most, so cleaning them up to kind of be on par with modern PS4 games would definitely take a bit of time. So I think they just wanted to do just a quick and dirty remaster of God of War 3, and that's that. But I just think it sucks because it's just like, yeah, do 1 and 2 as well. Yeah, you have the PSP games in this saga too, but it's also, okay, you don't need to do the PSP games. Just, if they just did the original God of War trilogy, I think that would have made a lot more sense. But as it stands, God of War 3 Remastered feels like a remaster that was kind of just farted out to just have a God of War game on store shelves. I don't know. Yeah, Life is Strange Remastered, which, again, you know, pretty modern game, remastering it, sure, whatever, but kind of fucks with the whole art style of the original. You know, a lot of what made the original unique is kind of just stripped away from the remaster. And on top of that, it overall just looks worse. Like, it almost looks unfinished in many ways. It is something where it gets to a point where I'm kind of like, okay, I can play the PS4 game on PS5. Like, what is the point of this? But I'd say some of the most unnecessary remakes is a lot of later life 3DS releases by Nintendo, because kind of to put out content on the 3DS without taking up too many resources, Nintendo decided to put out a lot of remakes and ports on the 3DS. So we got stuff like the original Luigi's Mansion remade on 3DS. We got a port of Kirby's Epic Yarn, and we got a remake of Bowser's Inside Story. This one is the most egregious, obviously following in the footsteps of the Superstar Saga remake that launched in 2017. Then this remake was announced just a couple of months later, and that was just really shocking. Yeah, the Superstar remake made sense because that was a Game Boy Advance game, so that getting a remake on 3DS fundamentally made it so then the entire Mario and Luigi series up to that point was playable on 3DS, because the 3DS could play DS games via backwards compatibility. Which is what this is. And then they do a remake, and it's kind of like, what the fuck is the point of this? 1, Bowser's Inside Story doesn't need a remake. 2, you can already play the game on the 3DS by just getting a used copy of the original. So, okay. This developer died because of this game, because it didn't sell well. Who would have thought? You remake a game that doesn't need to be remade on a platform that nobody's playing anymore because it's goddamn 2019 and it's the 3DS. What? Now, these two right here, I think are less egregious, but still kind of like, you know, I don't really see the point in this. This one less so. I think Luigi's Mansion on 3DS is a cool concept, mainly because early in development of the original Luigi's Mansion on GameCube, that game was being tested with stereoscopic 3D in mind. And then you also had Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon on the 3DS, which took advantage of the 3D. So having the original in 3D right next to its sequel, it's kind of like, okay, this is kind of cute. And then you also have certain elements in this game. You have co-op multiplayer with Gooigi in this game. And Gooigi ended up actually becoming a massive part of Luigi's Mansion 3. So it's kind of like a cool thing that Gooigi was kind of foreshadowed in this remake. And the way they incorporate him is kind of neat. Like, they had a whole scene in the remake where EGAD from the future calls in and transports Gooigi into this game. Like, that is kind of cool. But at the same time, this was definitely a situation where I think most people were kind of saying, like, that's cool that you're remaking Luigi's Mansion. I don't like that it's on the 3DS. In many ways, you could consider this version to be the definitive version of Luigi's Mansion, but they did have to compromise the control a little bit, and the visuals are definitely kind of like either you think they look better or you think they look worse, because in many ways, you know, they modernized a lot of the visuals, but it's also on like a 240p screen, so who cares? But I can definitely tell they really cared about this remake. Kirby's Extra Epic Yarn, by comparison, like, it kind of feels like it's slapped onto the 3DS. Like, it doesn't even have 3D support. And there's a section in this game, like, you know, the portion where you have to draw train tracks for Kirby as a train to travel on. And with the original on Wii, you use the Wii Remote pointer to draw the tracks. Here, you think it would have made a lot of sense to just use the touchscreen to draw the tracks. No, you use the circle pad with a cursor to draw the tracks, which kind of tells me, like, they kind of took the quicker way out. Like, don't quote me on this, but I feel like the porting process was probably easier to just make it a cursor to use your circle pad with than to enable, like, you know, stylus support for that portion. Now, they do a couple of cool things with this port that kind of addresses some of the complaints people had about Kirby's Epic Yarn. So, for example, you know, Kirby doesn't really gain power-ups in the traditional sense in this game. But you know, oh, they included Ravel abilities here. So, okay, like, Kirby has some power-ups here. But, you know, the game isn't designed around them, so they just kind of feel like this doesn't really work in the game. And Devilish Mode is kind of the hard mode of Kirby's Epic Yarn, because Kirby's Epic Yarn's big complaint everybody had about it was the fact that, oh, it's too easy. Well, now you have Devilish Mode. But Devilish Mode is kind of like a really lame version of a difficulty mode where just this annoying-ass devil comes in every now and then and just starts fucking with you. I don't know. This one just kind of feels like it was kind of slapped onto the 3DS. It's still like a decent enough version of Kirby's Epic Yarn, but this is a port that was done not because it made sense artistically or creatively, but because it made sense logistically. Like, oh yeah, let's pump out a Kirby game. Oh yeah, we need more content on the 3DS. Oh, Kirby's Epic Yarn, that's a 2D game. That would work fundamentally on the 3DS. Okay, yeah, okay, let's do that. Now, to round things out, I have a couple of games here that I think were up for debate as to, like, if they're unnecessary remakes or remasters at one point or another. And, you know, I think they might have kind of proven their worth over time. So, for example, we got Sonic X Shadow Generations. I remember when this remaster was rumored about, when there were rumors about a Sonic Generations remaster happening. I remember a lot of people were going like, what the hell? We don't need this, all of this stuff, because Sonic Generations already has like this super nice version available on Xbox One, Xbox Series X through backwards compatibility. Then you also have the PC version, which, you know, has been played to death and modded to death, all of that stuff. And, you know, to be fair, the Sonic Generations portion of this package really isn't anything that special. It's obviously the Shadow Generations portion that is kind of the major talking point here. Sonic Generations does have a new script, which is really interesting. I do think it's kind of unnecessary. Like, obviously, Sega has been taking the Sonic franchise a lot more seriously lately in terms of like its storylines, lore, characters, all of that. And Sonic Generations kind of came out during a time where like they were trying to make Sonic storylines and dialogue very kind of like Saturday morning cartoonish. But see, in my opinion, I think Sonic is very Saturday morning cartoony in something like Sonic Colors or Sonic Lost World. Sonic Generations is a pretty straightforward plot. I didn't think there was a ton of stuff that needed to be changed, and now that they are, like, I'm just kind of like, it's just whatever. But in terms of the core game, like Sonic Generations 1 is pretty much the exact goddamn same. But I think this remaster was kind of warranted in the sense that, like, hey, Nintendo players, PlayStation players, they could get like the original Sonic Generations on their modern platforms. I remember throughout the PS4 generation, I really did want a Sonic Generations remaster or re-release on PS4 because I love Generations. And I do think it is really cool that they really warranted doing this with Shadow Generations being included. And, you know, Shadow Generations is pretty much on par with like Sonic Forces in terms of length, and Sonic Forces is a standalone game, so it's like, yeah, I think this definitely proved its worth. But at the time of like its rumored existence, I think people were kind of like, it's just like, I don't know about this. Kind of a similar reason why Red Dead Redemption got re-released on PS4 and Nintendo Switch, primarily because like this game was not natively available on those platforms. So it was available on Xbox via backwards compatibility, so they didn't re-release this game on Xbox. But on PS4 they did, and the PS4 version is pretty much the exact goddamn same as the Xbox 360 version. It just runs at 1080p and at a stable frame rate. Okay. This version of the game is quite literally like the bare minimum that they could have done for this game on PS4. You don't get the original multiplayer in this version, and visually it pretty much looks the exact same as the Xbox 360 version. This is literally kind of just to check a box and put this game out on PS4, and I think it was a little pricey at the time. I think this was like $50. So this isn't even really a remaster, it's more of a port. And then like a couple of years later, Rockstar announced that there would be another version of Red Dead Redemption, which definitely fits as more of a remaster because it was coming out on PS5, Xbox Series X, Switch 2, all of that stuff, where it was in 4K, 60 FPS. So to be honest, like, I do think it is really good that Red Dead Redemption is kind of locked in as just a staple in Rockstar's game catalog. You know, it's just something where, yeah, you know, you can just play it on modern consoles. It's not leaving anytime soon. So it's hard for me to call this unnecessary. I can be very critical of the PS4 version releasing. Like, I feel like this should have been much more, but it is literally just a straightforward port. Now, Super Monkey Ball Banana Blitz HD, to an extent, I get why they remastered it, but this definitely is kind of a remaster that nobody really wanted. You know, it originally released on the Wii, and this was kind of like where the Monkey Ball franchise kind of started to go downhill. So this HD version gets rid of the Wii version's motion controls, so that's kind of cool. They replaced the entire soundtrack, which, you know, is kind of a shame because the Wii version soundtrack is really fun. They cut a lot of the mini games out of this version, which, fair, considering most of the mini games in the Wii version sucked ass. But it's still kind of weird, you know, it's something where it's just like, can you really consider this to be the definitive version of Banana Blitz? So that's kind of why I consider this to be unnecessary. It's a mediocre game in the franchise. It was the first Monkey Ball game in a while, and they remaster one of the lamer ones. But it's kind of a part of this whole lineup because I think this game was kind of the one they chose because it would have been the easiest to remaster, because visually the Wii version still holds up pretty okay. So I think this was kind of like an easier one for them to do compared to the first two GameCube ones, which don't age as well visually. And I think without this, we wouldn't have gone Monkey Ball Banana Mania, which is a much better game, and then Monkey Ball Banana Rumble, which is an even better game. So yeah, you know, like, yeah, right, yeah, sure, whatever. You warrant existing for now. The Resident Evil 4 remake is often kind of considered unnecessary because Resident Evil 4 still holds up incredibly well to this day. Though I will definitely say, kind of similar to Until Dawn, it's something where if you start playing the original game, you might kind of be like, oh, the controls are a little outdated. Oh, this doesn't feel 100% right. But then you kind of keep with it and you're like, all right, I'm smelling what this game is stepping in. I get its vibe. You know, Resident Evil 4 is kind of meant to feel a little clunky, even though it isn't very clunky, but like, yeah, it does take a second to get used used to, but I think its control setup and the way the original works is definitely a good balance between it gives you enough control, but it doesn't make you feel overly powerful. You know, and that's kind of important in a horror game. You don't want to feel like you can do anything, because then it's just like, all right, well, all these enemies aren't really threatening to you. And the original Resident Evil 4, it can be kind of scary sometimes, but it's definitely not the scariest kind of survival horror game out there. So I think that really worked, and overall, the original RE4's game design holds up tremendously well. One of the greatest games of all time. So the idea of a modern remake was kind of like, oh man, why do that? But I think this remake 100% proved its worth. Like, this thing is phenomenal. It respects the hell out of the original, it retains so much from it, but it upgrades so much, and it definitely does kind of do its own thing while also still being Resident Evil 4, and I think that's really cool. Like, I can't imagine how difficult this game must have been to produce, because it is Resident Evil 4, but it's also not. It's able to kind of stand on its own while also still being that original game. Like, it's nuts. I don't even know how to explain it. I think that does show to be more open about the idea of like, oh my God, some of the best games of all time getting remakes. Because, you know, I think like I've seen a lot of discourse surrounding the idea of like, oh my God, Nintendo should never remake Super Metroid or something. But I think when you look at something like Metroid Dread, or you see how they remade Metroid 2 Return of Samus with Metroid Samus Returns, or even how they remade the original Metroid with Metroid Zero Mission on GBA, like Super Metroid is definitely like one of the most legendary games of all time. But like when you see what they were able to do with a game like Metroid Dread in terms of how fluid that game feels to control, how well that game is designed overall, kind of the upgraded move Samus has, I think that shows we should be open to the idea of remakes of some of the greatest games of all time. Because genuinely, look at what they were able to do with RE4. While I would recommend the original to people, I think to most players, I would recommend playing the remake. I think the remake is immediately easier to get started with. But, you know, like, hey, when you're done with this, you can try out the original and see how the original did things. And I think if you keep an open mind, you can go into the original and you can be like, wow, like they were doing all of this back in 2005. Which is why I think it's really important to have kind of the original versions of games available. If you're going to do a full-blown remake of something, I think it's really cool to be able to have the original games available. Like I said with Red Dead Redemption, yeah, I think you can be incredibly critical about this re-release in many ways. It was incredibly overpriced. They didn't do anything to it. But at the same time, I think it's kind of cool that they didn't do anything to it, because you have the original Red Dead Redemption always here. If they ever do a remake of Red Dead Redemption, you have the original you can always go back to. Which is why I also have Tomb Raider Definitive Edition here as well, as kind of the last bit of like the remasters or remakes that may have initially been kind of considered unnecessary, but over time I think have kind of proved their worth. Like I said, these damn things went through hell and back during the PS4 generation. Don't act like that didn't happen. And while I think definitive editions and remasters kind of flooded this generation a bit too much at times, I think it was kind of worth it at the end of the day, because when you go back to the original 360 or PS3 versions of a lot of these games, like I tried playing Uncharted 2 and 3 on the PS3, and that shit runs like ass. Like the frame rate stutters constantly. There's all this weird motion blur, all of this stuff. And then when you go to the Uncharted Nathan Drake collection, everything is buttery smooth. It looks a lot better, all of that. Yes, it could be even more better if you put it out on PS5 at 4K, 60 frames per second. But at the very least, I think it was really worth it to kind of put a lot of these 360 games on this generation of platforms, because it kind of allowed them to live in a place where they ran well. And with this generation moving forward into the next one, you know, all these games are still available on the newer consoles. So I think it just kind of created a good environment where we have so many games throughout the years at our disposal on these modern stores. And man, I think that's just important. But that doesn't mean that you need to re-release the same goddamn game like 5 different times. Well, anyway, please let me know what remasters or remakes you think is unnecessary. And keep in mind, unnecessary doesn't mean bad. It just means, what the f was the point of that? But you know what, to be fair, I could have saved us all a bunch of time by just saying that to every game. What the f is the point of this? What the f is the point of this? What the f is the point of this?